I addressed an interesting topic yesterday. It was a discussion um, between Redeem Zuma and Gavin Ortland, which was talking about when is it okay to schism from a church, to break away from a church. The context of this conversation was talking about mainline churches. So, for example, Redeem Zuma is part of the PCUSA, the Presbyterian Church USA, and questions arose around this. Now, the reason that I did a video is because his answer was so shocking to me that I just felt that I had to address it. It's not usually the type of topic that I would do. But when asked how liberal would a church have to become, or what would have to take place in order to break away, to leave a mainline church and go to an evangelical church, which he defined as those churches which have broken away from mainline churches. So, for example, non-denominational churches. One of the conditions was if you are excommunicated from a mainline church. So he said, like the example that he used is, say with the Catholic Church, for example, he is excommunicated from the Catholic Church because a number of the doctrines that he believes are actually declared anathema by the Catholic Church. So that's a legitimate reason to schism. But apart from being excommunicated from a church, they touched briefly on persecution, but there was essentially no other valid reason to not be part of a mainline church over an evangelical church, even if the evangelical church was gospel-centered and biblical, and the particular local mainline church had strayed from even orthodoxy in terms of the core doctrines of the Christian faith. And one of the things that was brought up was the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the physical resurrection. So the thing that shocked me is that Redeem Zuma said that he would stay in the church, the mainline church, no matter how liberal it became. And that was the one line that really stood out to me. And then when he was pressed on this, Gavin Ortland said, well, what if there was the only mainline church in a particular city believed that didn't believe, rejected the physical bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ? Would it be preferable to stay in that church or to attend an evangelical church which affirms the resurrection of Jesus Christ? And he said that he would actually stay in a church that denied the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and that he did that in high school under no less a female minister, which is also something that is completely unbiblical. So it was very interesting. And what I want to talk about is the context behind this. So he is really promoting Conquista, which is he is concerned by the fact that liberals basically have taken over the mainline church institutions. And he's saying that rather than abandoning those institutions, what we should do is fight back and reclaim them, even if that means coming under a particular local church that is holding to heretical doctrine. So that's a bit of the context. Now, I'm going to read out the comment that he actually left on my video, and then I'm going to get into this a bit. So he said, "Hey, brother, I should let you know that this clip is very out of context. I think attending a church with a heretical pastor is an absolute last resort. If there's any non-heretical mainline church you can attend that one, because unlike Gavin Ortland, I don't believe the beliefs of a pastor define the church. The beliefs of a church are the confessions of its denomination. So temporarily being in a congregation with a heretical pastor does not mean approving their heresy, as long as you're in a denomination that holds to biblical confession." So I understand his position. I understand what he's saying here. I understand his motivation behind it. And there is a noble motivation as well, that this mainline church has been the institution hijacked by liberals. Rather than letting them win and laying down and dying, let's fight back and remain in part of that mainline organization so that we can reclaim it. And there's something very noble behind that. But I believe that there are a number of problems. and I'm going to address those. So that's the context for those of you who didn't know what the context was. So I wanted to communicate that. He spoke about, in another recent video that he did, about Gavin Ortland giving a very rare hypothetical. I don't see any problem with rare hypothetical, because what a rare hypothetical does is it actually exposes the flaws of a position. If a position cannot hold up under that particular hypothetical, which it may be rare, it may not be rare, we can debate over that, but it's a very real situation that does take place, then it's a very valid point to bring up, because that is actually happening and people are having to make those decisions. So we can see, well, what is the decision that you're advocating for under those circumstances? And for him, it is to remain in that particular mainline church. And he goes as far as to say, if there's not a mainline church in your city, you should move city. You should move location to a location where there is a mainline church. He said that this is what people did in the past, and this is what people should do. So he's really elevating a particular organizational structure here in a way that I think is problematic, and I'm going to discuss that a bit more. Now, he says that he's not encouraging people to go to a heretical church, but the reality is that he actually is in particular instances. And for me, that's problematic enough. If you were even encouraging someone once to go to a heretical church, that's problematic enough. I know what he's saying. He's saying, I'm not adopting what these liberals are teaching. I'm not adopting these positions that that particular local church, even if they're preaching heresy, I'm rejecting that, but I'm staying in that to try to reform that church and take back that church. But what you are telling someone to do is to be part of a heretical local church, even if you don't think the overall organization itself is heretical. That's something he talks about the confessions of the overall church, like so the PCUSA being the thing that defines the church, not the beliefs of the individual pastor or minister or bishop or whatever it might be of the local church. But the problem with that is that that particular local church, even though it's under the banner of an organization, which, mind you, has no authority in and of itself, that organization, it is a man-made organization, that particular local church itself is a non-biblical church. By definition, it doesn't meet the criteria of a biblical church. It rejects the gospel, and it violates church leadership as well in that particular local church. So you can say, oh, well, we're under this banner, so it doesn't make it heretical, but that doesn't mean that that particular local church is not a heretical, non-biblical church, a legitimate church even. So, and I know that he's saying, well, this isn't happening in all of these churches. But like I said, if it's happening in any of these churches, that's enough for me. And there are enough of these churches that this is happening in, that it is incredibly problematic. And this is why we see the discussion. Another point that was problematic for me is he actually said that those people who are leaving the mainline church are the ones who are weak in their faith, and those who are staying are the ones that are strong in their faith. And those who are leaving are cowards, essentially. I know he tried to clarify this a bit, but that's what he was saying. In fact, it can take a lot of courage to leave a false church. You've got your community there. You've got your life is invested in that place for a long period of time. And it can be incredibly courageous to break away because this church isn't upholding truth, and you making a stand for truth is leaving that particular church. That's what I would say. People can leave a church for, the smallest reasons. That is just silly, jump from church to church. But when someone has to make a legitimate decision like that, I would applaud them taking that particular stand. The thing is, like I said, there is an upholding of the institution here above the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I want to get into some more, a few more points here. So I wrote a response to Redeem Zoomer, and I'm going to touch on some of the points. So I said, thanks, RZ, which is Redeem Zoomer. I watched the entire 2-hour discussion, and I'm familiar with the Reconquista. I probably could have put a few sentences talking about this for context, maybe in another video if I were to do one. I understand your position, but the fact stands, although a last resort, you would attend and recommend attending a church which is essentially apostate. And I have the following concerns. So I'll briefly just go through these. The first concern is that that individual church no longer qualifies as a biblical church. It's an apostate church. Um, so it doesn't matter whether it's under a certain banner that holds to orthodox confessions. That local church has disqualified itself. You can put whatever label on it, whatever organization it belongs to, but that organization doesn't therefore make that individual local church a legitimate biblical church if it violates what a biblical church is. Now, point number two, you would be recommending churches which are non-biblical churches over churches which do meet the criteria for a biblical church. So you would be recommending that people go in those instances to a church which is unbiblical and heretical over a good gospel-centered church simply because it belongs to a particular organization. I don't see any justification or legitimate grounds for that. Now, point number three was an interesting one here, because I said that unless one believes in the one true church organization, which many false churches do believe in that, then there's no objective basis for this position that one should remain in a mainstream church, or that one is obliged in any way to remain in a mainstream church, or that it's evil or wrong or sinful to break away from one of these churches and attend another church, or even set up another church. It makes zero difference whether someone's in a mainline church or not. It's pure personal preference, because there's no authority behind that church. There's no biblical authority behind that church. If you're claiming to believe in the one true church, then you have grounds, at least, even though I believe you're wrong, to be able to say, well, you can't break away from this church because it's the one true church. But if you don't believe in that, then any church organization in and of itself is a man-made organization. So I just don't see the argument there. It doesn't make any sense. And point number four was that the confessions don't hold any authoritative value. They may be a helpful guide. You may agree with them, you may disagree with them. They may be 100% correct. They may be a bit off base, but in and of themselves, I mean, they're not inerrant. They're not. He might argue that the Westminster Confession or whatever other creeds confessions are inerrant, but I would reject that. That's a subjective claim that they are inerrant, if he's going to say that. Not infallible. Let's not confuse the two terms. But that doesn't hold any authority. A confession, it's just something that a group of men got together and they agreed upon, and you might agree with it, you might not agree with it, but it doesn't have any authority. Now, point number five was that you're giving a position to mainline churches that the Bible doesn't give. That's one of my points here. Respectfully, these churches could almost be considered an idol when they're prioritized over the gospel itself. So if you're elevating this church and you're saying that your fidelity, your faithfulness needs to be to this organization ahead of the gospel, which it is in this instance, you can argue all you want saying that, well, this particular organization holds to an orthodox confession. But if that particular local church doesn't, it violates that, it operates in contradiction to that, then it's not actually holding to that, even if under agreement or structure, it's a part of an organization which does hold to that. So that's problematic to me. There's no allegiance to these particular organizations biblically. Point number six is that I say that it's dangerous, because if you're inviting people to this church, it's problematic. If you're actively inviting people, even if you're not actively inviting people, but unsaved people are asking you, what church do you attend? And I want to come to that church, and they come to the church and they're sitting under a transgender minister who's denying the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. Is that not completely dangerous? You could have solid people around you. You could be there ministering to this person, but they're in a church. They're in looking at the leadership coming into this place. A person that's not a Christian, or maybe a new Christian, or whatever, they're exploring the faith, and they're believing that transgender ministers can be ministers. They're believing that Jesus didn't bodily rise from the dead. They're not hearing the gospel. It's absolutely crazy. It's just incredibly dangerous. I mean, the Bible says that if any of you cause a little one to stumble, it's better that a millstone be hung around your neck and you be cast into the sea. And Redeemed Zuma, if he was telling someone about this church, getting them into the church, and they were sitting under this, would be causing someone to stumble in this instance. Now, the few points that I've got here is that he made comparison to the Old Testament temple, how it fell like into apostasy basically, but they didn't abandon this. Now, I just said that I reject any comparison to the Old Testament temple, and this is a false conflation. It's not a like for like, and there are a number of differences there. That's another topic. I won't go into that. And the other thing that I noticed is he was appealing to like authority figures. He was appealing to people like one guy, he was quoting Bailey, who he quoted over and over again. Well, Bailey says this, Bailey says that, and they're debating the meaning of, well, this is what Bailey says. No, this is clearly what Bailey says. To be honest with you, I couldn't really give a rip what Bailey says. Bailey is not binding authoritatively in any way. He's just another individual, another man who has an opinion on this issue, and that's why I don't appeal to those types of people. We can learn from different perspectives, but what book of the Bible did Bailey write? He didn't write a book in the Bible. So I'm not going to look to that, because there are many people in academia, many people that hold to many positions, and their opinions and views can help me to inform the formation of my views and decisions, and for you, but they're not authoritative. So appealing to him and saying, well, he believed this, that doesn't hold any water for me whatsoever. It just doesn't. And then the last point that I raised here is that I completely agree that many evangelical churches today are a mess. I do agree with that. There are dangers there too. And I said that I don't like concert style worship. That's not my thing. I would prefer traditional hymns. I would prefer something that brings people to a place of contrition, something that I believe is more respectful, that is more reverent, more traditional even. I agree with him there. I said at the same time, a number of these styles, they are preferences. And I said that if a church can operate in that manner, if it is gospel-centered and has oversight and meets the biblical criteria of a church. So a church can operate in a number of different cultures in a number of different ways. I don't prefer that. I would prefer a traditional church. I would prefer a church that has maybe hymns or slower songs that bring contrition, that none of the rubbish of Hillsong, Bethel, and Elevation and all of that absolute garbage worship music. None of the loud volume in a church that's like a concert style where the volume is so loud that people in the congregation are wearing earplugs. Like literally, I've seen this happen. I would do away with all of that in a heartbeat, and I would even maybe formalize things a bit more than they are, have a bit more reverence around it. But at the same time, in terms of the style itself, we can't go beyond what is written there. We may have preferences, but if it's preaching the gospel and it's not doing anything that violates the Bible, it is a gospel-centered church. It's a legitimate biblical church, and it brings glory to God as long as the gospel is being preached and disciples are being made. It can be a place that is absolutely thriving, and we need to be careful not to let our biases and preferences become non-negotiables and disqualifiers for particular churches. One of the other points that was mentioned in the discussion between the two was for families with children. Would you bring children into those types of churches that aren't preaching the bodily resurrection, that are opposing that have transgender clergy and that? And that was one of the points that Redeemed Zuma said, well, you might go into one of the other evangelical churches for a time being and then come back into the mainline church. But the whole thing is that he's just elevating the mainline church to a place of really, it is almost idolatry. Like it seems to be elevating it above the gospel of Jesus Christ. So, I mean, you can see here from everything that I've raised that I understand his position. I understand the nuances, but I just completely reject it. And as I pointed out in my other video that I did, there are many verses that warn us about about fleeing from error, about the dangers of being under error. And if we're sitting under that and allowing other people, inviting people to sit under that, then, I think that's incredibly problematic. These churches are no more special than any other gathering of believers under biblical leadership. And to elevate them, like I said, it becomes an idol. These churches will reap the fruit of what they are sowing. And if people were to leave these churches to just flood out the doors of these churches, that could be a good thing. These churches could completely crash and burn, and I know that that will just devastate someone like Redeemed Zuma. But if these particular churches are crashing and burning, and new churches are rising up that are holding to the true gospel message without compromise, then that's a good thing. These churches are flourishing, and I want to invest my time and energy into these churches. I'm not saying we leave at the first sign of anything, but there comes a point where it crosses a line and a local church becomes apostate. To remain in that church, I believe, is actually a sin. I believe it's actually a sign of weak faith rather than strong faith. And I believe it's a sign of compromise rather than courage. And even, I guess, the last point, if we were to talk about the PCUSA, and the overall structure, he's saying, well, they hold to these confessions. Well, they actually affirm, they actually ordain openly affirming LGBT. That's what the church holds to, regardless of what any of the local churches are doing. So that in and of itself really makes the organization heretical. I don't see how you can. It violates God's sexuality. It violates the leadership requirements in a church. So it's just a mess. I just don't understand, to be honest, why this discussion is even being had. It would be so good if people went to churches that were biblical churches, supported these churches, and these churches rose up. Maybe there's a bit of that sentimental aspect that these institutions that have seen so much fruit come forth over the years, we want to protect those, we want to reclaim those. But you know what? God can do something in the past through a particular organization. But you know what? Maybe that's for a period of time. And maybe that organization is then going to decay and die, and something else is going to rise up. And someone might say, well, what if then liberals take over these other organizations? Well, what I would say is there will always be a remnant that will be faithful. And if we have those strong, faithful churches, and the people coming through the doors are going to be built up into maturity, we're going to have more strong, mature believers in Christ. If we're bringing people into those churches, it's just so dangerous. It is just like basically throwing people in amongst the wolves. And I don't see any biblical justification for that. So those are just my quick thoughts. I'm not going to go on anymore. I just wanted to jump on in case people didn't know the context of what I was talking about. And maybe this might be something that is... it's not the usual type of topic that I talk about, so it might not be something that interests everyone, but it will be something that interests some, and it's something that I wanted to speak on. So, yeah, thank you for listening. If you haven't already watched the other video, go and watch it, and you'll see the clips of Redeemed Zuma talking to Gavin Ortland, and those clips really are quite confronting, actually. Just want to thank those people for the super chats as well. Lois B, thank you very much for your super chat. And Trent as well. I know that you've both sent those sent super chats through before, so thank you very much. For those who would like to support the channel, you can support me on Patreon for as little as $3 a month. You can join up to that, and also PayPal is another way to support too. So always super chats and super thanks can help as well. But would really love that. Would love for you to be part of the Patreon community. If you want to join and help support this work, we definitely need your help. Yeah, if you continuing to watch the videos, being blessed by them, and leaving a like and even a comment on the videos is incredibly helpful too. So yeah, I have some other videos which are planned coming up. This, like I said, isn't the topic I usually cover, so I'll be moving back into some more of the topics that I do cover. And this is why these things are not the main thing. I like to put first thing first, which is helping to encourage, inspire, challenge, and convict, to lead people to know God more, become more like Jesus, and to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I know that's the heart of the people who are regularly watching this channel. So thank you so much for tuning in for this live stream. Leave your comments below. Would love to get your thoughts, and I will talk to you soon. God bless you, friends.